Remember when Google's AI suggested that we all eat rocks? Well, for a lot of people, it was a wake up call that perhaps AI can't always be trusted to be truthful. So we took that as a call to action to dig a little deeper into rocks. So I'm Julia Angwin. I'm the founder of Proof News. Thanks for watching our Proof Ingredients video series where we talk to journalists, content creators, and experts about what goes into a great investigation. And this week, we're talking to an expert on rocks, Cate Larsen, a geologist and online content creator. We asked her to try out our AI testing software that we built. It allows her to ask 5 different AI models questions about geology that keep her up at night. Cate posts under the handle Groovy Geologist on TikTok, and today she joins us to talk about what she learned from AI while testing the 5 leading models. So welcome, Cate.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia. I'm really excited to have worked with Proof News on this project, and I'm really excited to share with you my findings.
I'm so excited too. But before we start, let's just introduce you. Tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got interested in geology, and how you got into doing content creation.
Well, I graduated from college in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, the lockdown, everything. It was hard to find work at the time, hard to get into grad school at the time. And I've really just missed talking about geology all the time, like I did with my peers and my professors. And I came to find out that people on social media, particularly on TikTok, really want to hear about that stuff. And they saw me as like a beacon of knowledge. And I was like, that's wonderful. I could talk about this for hours. So I started creating social media content, both educating about geology as well as kind of highlighting the funny parts of it. Bringing a lot of humor into there definitely helped give people a different idea of what geology is and what geology majors and geologists like myself do. So it has definitely changed the public perception of my field in a really positive way. And I'm thankful not to be the only person doing this. There are so many other geoscience content creators out there who are doing the good work to kind of teach about this topic that is so widely overlooked.
It is one of the greatest things about social media and TikTok and YouTube, I think in particular, is the love for science, which has not actually been true in a lot of like public spaces that I've been in prior to that. And so I love that you're doing that. And we are, of course, nerds over here too at Proof News, just in a slightly different way. So we built this software to look at the different AI models and see if we could compare them on accuracy, because our hypothesis is that if we talk about AI like it's one thing, then everyone thinks it's just all the same. But actually, these are big companies competing with each other, and we should really highlight the ones who are doing well and also call out the ones who are doing poorly. So I'm curious if you could talk about what, when we came to you and said, do you want to do this? What were you thinking about AI at that point, and what was your idea about what you might want to do?
I was thinking, thank God someone's going to be talking about this, because at the time that Proof reached out to me, it was just the time that Google introduced those AI search summaries. And that was when everyone was searching up how many rocks should I eat? And it was telling them that geologists recommend people eat 2 to 3 rocks a day. And I remember seeing that, and people were sending me that all over Instagram. Like they were like DMing me, hey, have you seen this? And I'm like, yeah, that is really stupid and really annoying. Because obviously people have questions about geology. I get them every day. And to see people turning to AI to answer these questions definitely makes me nervous. So, of course, I was excited to test each of them out. I didn't know there were this many models out there. The only one I've been familiar with was ChatGPT. And I'd used it a couple of times and found that it's not the best. I'm constantly telling it, no, that's not quite right.
Tell us, what kind of questions did you ask the models?
I took some questions that I know people ask. What's the oldest rock in the world? What do geologists do? How many different, had made like a list of all the ones that I'd asked. Oh, what rocks can I lick? That's a very common one.
Really?
Yeah. And explaining the geologic time scale. Some people have a hard time comprehending that. I feel like this is something that geology students in college might ask an AI, hey, simplify this really complicated thing for me. So I asked questions like that, but I was also taking the route of some popular geology conspiracies or things that people were confused about. I had asked the AIs, is carbon dating accurate? How do we know the Earth is this old? What is the geological evidence for something like the Great Flood, in biblical stories? I wanted to see how it would talk about those, how it would assure somebody, reassure someone that the science is real, it's here. I want people to get good answers on them because I can't always give them the best answers. They don't always
Right.
want to take it from a scientist.
So, okay, so basically your hypothesis was um, to test how AI respond to common questions and misconceptions about geology.
Yeah, my
How,
my general hypothesis was that it wasn't going to do a very good job because a lot of these explanations need they need a certain tone. They need a certain level of information. I know my biggest theory was that a lot of them were going to be outdated because there's new research coming out every day, and I don't think that AIs have access to all of these paywalled journals that are going to have this new up to date information. So I was definitely interested to see how it would respond with questions that would involve more recent discoveries.
so tell us what you found. Was there an overall finding, like they all were bad, or were some better than others?
Weirdly enough, I the most commonly used AI, which is I'm pretty sure it's Chat GPT. I think it's the one that everybody really uses. I found that it was a little bit too brief often with answers, and it was leaving out a lot of information that would be very helpful to include. It would provide more context. I feel if someone's going to AI for an answer, they want explanation. It's as if they're asking someone face to face, hey, can you explain this in like really deep detail for me? And if an AI isn't giving them that, what are they really getting out of it? So I found that ChatGPT, despite it being the most popular one, often missed the mark. One of the metrics I was using to, I guess, essentially rate these responses for each query was if it was like missing information or it was giving me something irrelevant, like it wasn't getting the question I asked. Often when I tried to use something like ChatGPT, I'd have to like refine and say, no, 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 that's not what I asked for. I asked each of the models, how old is the oldest rock? And 4 out of 5 of them told me how old the oldest mineral is. And that reinforces the misconception that rocks and minerals are the same thing. And that is something that most people who don't have a really a good science education, maybe who didn't take earth science in high school, or they did but they just don't care, they think rocks and minerals are the same thing, and they're not. So in reality, the question, how old is the oldest rock in the world, needs a very nuanced answer. It needs explanation because, oh, well, are you asking about the oldest rock formation? Or are you asking about the oldest mineral found in a rock? Or are you asking about the oldest evidence of rocks, which, by the way, we don't have? And the model that I found gave me those really detailed, multiple possibility answers was Google's Gemini. Despite it being the one that told people to eat rocks every day, that's the one that was consistently giving me the best answers. And I feel like a terrible scientist for praising it because nothing is better than a face to face person explaining something to you. But it did do a pretty good job,
Well, it also
honestly.
could have been that Gemini was feeling a little bad about its previous rock
Yeah.
recommendations, and so they cleaned up their act. But that is a really interesting finding, and it's really interesting to think about how brevity is, I think as journalists we're taught to write short, right? And that is like how people want their information. And it actually is really interesting to hear you say that, like, no, you want nuance. And I guess that's really the difference between something that calls itself intelligence, right? If you're asking something to be intelligent, you want the full array of the answer.
My job as a geoscience communicator exists because scientists are not very good at explaining their science in a way that people can easily understand. So it's very common for people who are looking for an answer on a search engine, or they may be reading a textbook or asking a professor or a scientist, they might have a hard time understanding what it is they're looking at or what it is that they're hearing, because it's not broken down in a way they can understand. It needs to be digestible, comprehensible, without being too dumbed down to feel like you're being talked down to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think they've put a lot of work into making the model sort of friendly and not judgmental, right? That's a big part of the training. So I'm curious though, how many questions did you ask, and how many did they get right? Is there a way you can describe the sample size and the accuracy?
Yeah, I asked a total of 12 questions, and the accuracy that I got, it's not really numerically quantitative, because there's a lot that goes into how I judged each answer.
Yeah.
There were some that included wrong numbers, and I knew exactly where those wrong numbers came from because I know I've seen an article, or I've heard about this paper, and I'm like, oh, this pulled the wrong number, but the rest of it is right. But they just pulled the wrong
Mm-hmm.
number from some specific article that exists on the internet that was misquoting a scientific paper. And I definitely saw that happen a lot with the llama model,
Yeah, that's
which
Meta's llama.
it was
Yeah.
pulling a lot of wrong data. Like, it was something that I'm finding with these models is that they don't really judge where the information comes from.
And did your hypothesis, was it correct about the outdated information? You said that there's new research coming out. Did you find they were also out of
Surprisingly,
date?
maybe it's because I didn't ask questions that were super specific to recent discoveries, but I did find that it was pretty accurate in terms of numbers. I asked a lot of questions about geological dates, and I asked about the geologic timescale, and it was giving me the most up-to-date number, which is not super surprising because, you know, the age constraints of geologic periods is put out by the Geological Society of America, and there's the most up-to-date version that's come out within the last couple of years, and that's public information. It isn't behind a paywall, and there's already been lots of papers and articles that have come out since then using those newly refined numbers. So I was definitely surprised to see, when I asked the question about the geologic timescale, most of them did get it right.
I have to say, I've been a little bit dying to find out about the licking rocks situation. Um, First of all,
That
I don't
one
know whether you should
really
lick rocks, but
frustrated me. Nobody got that question right. Like, I was actually really mad about that. A lot of them were like, hey, you probably shouldn't lick these, but just because you're curious, here are some minerals that you could theoretically lick. And that was kind of annoying. To be clear, the only mineral that you can and should definitely lick is halite, which is, rock salt, table salt.
oh. So, if you were going to overall give them a grade or judge, what would you say was the performance overall of the models?
Surprisingly, if someone was going to ask me which model should I, ask these hard questions to, more specifically, if someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I have a family member who thinks the Earth is flat. Is there a way that I can explain it to them and maybe get like an AI script?" I would say Gemini. I
Oh,
would say that's the best of the ones that I had used and I tested. I found consistently very few issues with each response, and out of the 12, I think maybe I only had two responses out of the 12 queries that were a little bit off, but they were never really off. I thought that the answers that it gave to particular conspiracy questions were really like a breath of fresh air. Like, I was like, oh, thank God that they're saying something so good about this. They're, not just answering the question, but they're providing a background. Hey, you might be asking this because of this. You should know this as well. And I thought that was so helpful. It covered all the bases.
that's a very impressive result. Was there one that was the worst, maybe that fell for the conspiracy theories?
Llama, repeatedly had problems with. I was just like, this is incorrect. It's not answering the question. Trying to find which one it is. Oh, it was actually ChatGPT in this one question about the evidence for the Great Flood. It felt like it left things up to debate. It gave you the facts, but it said people are still researching it. I don't want to hear that. You're
Wait,
not
what?
supposed to.
Tell me
You're
about the
not
Great
supposed
Flood
to
because I
say
don't know
that.
anything about this whole.
The Great Flood is a story in Judaism and Christianity that there was at some point a gigantic flood that covered the entire earth in water. And
Oh,
according
this is the
to,
Noah's Ark thing.
yeah, so there's a lot of people who think that there's geologic evidence for this, and oftentimes it's a misinterpretation of real geologic physical things, but they're misinterpreting it, and those kinds of things run wild within this small community, and it's like an echo chamber. People, publishing things in journals, scientific journals, but they're not widely accredited journals. And what I'm glad that these models did was they didn't just take that and say, hey, here's research that says this. Except for, Chat GPT, they did give me a really weird answer. The interpretation of these features that people are seeing is up to someone's philosophical or religious, thoughts. But it often
Oh,
it
right.
scientifically there's a yes or no, and it's a no. There's no evidence globally of a flood that covered the entire earth at the same time.
Well, let's talk about the limitations. As you know, every investigation has limitations, and obviously, we're only able to test 12 questions across 5 models, which is, it's not it's 50 some responses, but um, it's still small sample. So, what would you like to see as like a broader study in this area?
That I would have loved to collect questions and queries from my audience, and for them to think about each response and say, I felt like this was explained to me well. I don't have to ask a second question, or I do have to ask a second question because I don't feel like I learned everything that I was asking from this response. And then maybe, an expert going in and being like, well, by the way, you had this question. Here is the actual answer. Here's how I would explain it.
What you're describing is so much the limitation of all AI testing right now because there's no public data available about what kind of questions people ask to the AI. So we're all guessing,
Yeah.
right? When we do these tests, we're just guessing based on like your own experience with what kind of questions people ask about geology. But the companies do know what kind of questions people are asking, but they don't share it with researchers or with the public. And so we're all sort of in the dark about that. And so that's a real limitation in the entire field of AI testing.
We could be using AI to our advantage in education, to better explain topics that maybe a teacher can't. Maybe it's something that they don't have the answer to, or if they do, they can't quite explain it, which is unfortunately a big problem in geology and academia. You have these incredibly smart scientists who just can't quite get the information to somebody else
Right.
who's a first time learner. So AI can be very helpful for that if we use it correctly and we play around with it some more and try to, I guess, suck it up. It's not going anywhere. Sucks. Might as well
Yeah,
use it to our advantage.
exactly. We didn't ask for it, but it's here. Yeah, I do. There are studies that say that people really trust the information from AI because it feels neutral. Like they don't feel like it's biased or it's somebody's agenda, and which I think is actually not true. As you know, I mean, it can be pulling from sources that are incorrect or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But if it helps in transmitting that information in a way that people can hear it better, that's great, right? So thank you so much for doing this testing with us and helping us understand how AI performs in all these different areas. Our thinking is that, like, we are journalists, we can test it a little bit in areas that we might understand, but we don't know what the right answer is in geology. But it is important to know whether you can trust AI in this space. And I think what we are learning from you is, like, trust but verify is probably the best mode right now, but maybe choose Google Gemini for your rock queries.
I think something that's really telling about this project and what it means for the future of, using AI to answer these kinds of questions in geoscience is we really should be teaching people how to search for their own information. So many of them resort to AI because no one knows how to look for scientific information, how to validate it, how to know if it's a credible source. So we have to tackle that as a society, I think, and I maybe alongside doing that, we can utilize AI done correctly.
This is the first step on the road to AI literacy, so thank you for taking it with us.